The Path of Freedom, Vimutti Magga, of Arahant Upatissa, published by the Buddhist Publication Society, Sri Lanka. Salutation. Homage to the Blessed One, the Consummate One, the Supremely Enlightened One. Chapter 12, on Discerning Truth. Section 1. Aggregates, elements, sense spheres. Now the yogin has understood the aggregates, elements, sense spheres, condition arising, and the truths. He has also heard concerning virtue, austerities, and meditation, jhana. Simile of the 300 halberds and of the burning head. The commoner fears ill-faring because he is not enlightened. If after contemplating on the fearfulness of ill-faring and of beginningless birth and death, he should think of not missing this opportunity, or on the similes of the points of the 300 halberds and of the man desirous of saving his burning head, the yogin is yet unable to understand the Four Noble Truths. He should proceed to discern the Noble Truths by way of analogy. He should develop the wish to do, strive earnestly, and accomplish the knowledge of the truths through completing the mindfulness of concentration. Procedure. What is the procedure? At first the yogin should listen to the Four Noble Truths expounded in brief or in detail, or in brief and in detail. Through hearing, seizing the sense and reiteration, he should bear them in mind. At this time, the yogin enters into a quiet place, sits down and composes his mind. He does not let it run hither and thither, and recalls to mind the Four Noble Truths. First he should recall to mind the truth of ill through aggregation, sense sphere, and element. The idea of aggregation should be recalled to mind through one's own characteristics and through the characteristics of the aggregates, in the way it was taught under the method of understanding the aggregates. The idea of sense sphere should be recalled to mind through the characteristics of sense sphere, in the way it was taught under the method of understanding the sense spheres. The idea of element should be recalled to mind through the characteristics of element, in the same way it was taught under the method of understanding the elements. Thus, having understood aggregate, sense sphere, and element, that yogin knows that there are only aggregates, sense spheres, and elements, and that there is no being or soul. Thus he gains a perception of the formations and gets to know the two divisions, namely, name and form. Here the 10 sense spheres and the 10 elements of the aggregate of matter constitute form. 4 aggregates, the sense spheres of mind, and the 7 elements constitute name. The sense spheres of ideas and the element of ideas are name and form. Name is one, form is another. Form is void of name, and name of form. Name is not separate from form, and form is not separate from name, like drum sound. Only through dependence on name, form proceeds, and through dependence on form, name proceeds, like the journeying afar of the blind and the cripple. Differences between name and form. What are the differences between name and form? Name has no body. Form has body. Name is hard to discern. Form is easily discerned. Name proceeds quickly. Form proceeds slowly. Name does not accumulate. Form accumulates. Name excogitates, knows, considers, is aware. Form does not do this. Form walks, leans, sits, lies down, bends and stretches. Name does not do this. Name knows, I go, I lean, I sit, I lie down, I bend, I stretched. Form does not know this. Form drinks, eats, chews, tastes. Name does not do this. Name knows I drink, I eat, I chew, I taste. Form does not know this. Form claps the hands, frolics, laughs, cries, and talks in many ways. Name does not do this. Name knows thus, I clap, I frolic, I laugh, I cry, I talk in such and such a manner. Form does not know this. These are the differences between name and form, and that yogin knows name and form thus. Only name and form are here. There is no being, there is no soul. Thus he, making it manifest, gets the perception of the formations. Summary of the truth of ill. Now this is a summary of the whole truth of ill. 1. Causing to arise knowledge or pure views, according to reality, discerns name and form. All these should be known as descriptive of the truth of ill. That yogin, having made manifest the truth of ill, considers the idea of a being. Thereafter, he should attend to the cause and condition of ill. Cause and condition of ill. What are the cause and condition of ill? That yogin knows thus. This ill has birth for cause and condition. Birth has becoming for cause and condition. Becoming has clinging for cause and condition. Clinging has craving for cause and condition. Craving has feeling for cause and condition. Feeling has contact for cause and condition. Contact has the 6 sense spheres for cause and condition. The 6 sense spheres have name and form for cause and condition. Name and form has consciousness for cause and condition. Consciousness has the formations for cause and condition. The formations have ignorance for cause and condition. Thus, depending on ignorance, there are the formations. Depending on the formations, there is consciousness. Depending on birth, there are decay, death, and grief. Thus all the aggregates of ill arise. Thus that yogin introspects the links of condition arising at length. The purity of transcending uncertainty. Now this is the summary. Depending on feeling, there arises craving. One makes manifest the origin of ill. The knowledge of the law of condition arising, Aryan understanding of condition arising, and knowledge of the purity of transcending uncertainty are terms descriptive of the knowledge which makes manifest the truth of origin. Truth of cessation. That yogin, after having grasped the truth of the origin of ill and transcended the uncertainty of the 3 phases of time, considers the cessation of ill. The destruction of what is the destruction of ill. That yogin knows thus, when birth is destroyed, ill is destroyed. When birth is destroyed, becoming is destroyed. When becoming is destroyed, clinging is destroyed. When clinging is destroyed, craving is destroyed. When ignorance is destroyed, the formations are destroyed. Thus, with the destruction of ignorance, the formations are destroyed. With the destruction of the formations, consciousness is destroyed. Decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, and grief are destroyed to the destruction of birth. Thus all the aggregates of ill are destroyed. Thus, having considered the links of condition arising at length, he views them in brief thus. Depending on feeling, there is craving. Owing to its destruction, ill is destroyed. Thus he makes manifest the truth of cessation. Truth of the path. Now that yogin, Having grasped the truth of cessation, considers the path of the cessation of ill thus: what path and what perfection constitute the destruction of craving? He considers the 5 clinging aggregates and the tribulation of these. He thinks, this is the path, this is perfection. He eradicates craving and causes the arising of the way truth. One should know this as it has been taught fully under the method of understanding the truth. 180 ways of knowing the 5 clinging aggregates, thus that yogin, having serially grasped the 4 truths, knows the 5 clinging aggregates in 180 ways, and by way of accumulation, he considers at length all matter of the past, future, and the present, internal and external, great and small, gross and subtle, and far and near, as impermanent, ill, and not self. In the same way, he deals with all feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. In each aggregate there are 12 states preceding at the door. In 5 aggregates, 12 times 5 makes 60. Thus the 60 kinds of seeing of impermanence, 60 kinds of seeing of ill, and 60 kinds of seeing of not self constitute 180. And again there are 180 states proceeding at the door, 6 internal sense spheres, 6 external sense spheres, 6 kinds of consciousness, 6 kinds of contact, 6 kinds of feeling, 6 kinds of perception, 6 kinds of volition, 6 kinds of craving, 6 kinds of initial application of thought, 6 kinds of sustained application of thought. These 10 sixes make up 60. 60 kinds of seeing of impermanence, 60 kinds of seeing of ill, and 60 kinds of seeing of not self. 3 times 60 are 180. Thus he discerns and investigates the formations through impermanence. The endless years, seasons, months, fortnights, days, nights, hours, and thought instants roll on, producing new states in succession, like the flame of a lamp. Thus he discerns and investigates the formations through suffering. Through ill-faring, a man experiences unhappiness, hunger, and fear. He is separated from dear ones. He experiences old age, disease, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, and grief. Such are the vicissitudes of the formations. Impermanence, ill, not self. Thus he discerns and considers the formations as not self. What is according to the teaching concerning cause and condition of the aggregates, of the sense spheres, and of the elements is the truth. According to karma result and conditioned arising, beings are born. There is no abiding being. There is no intrinsic nature in objects. He considers form as impermanent in the sense of extinction, as ill in the sense of fear, as not self in the sense of unreality. Thus he considers it in brief and at length. And in the same way, he thinks that feeling, perception, the formations, consciousness are impermanent in the sense of extinction, are suffering in the sense of fear, are not self in the sense of unreality. Thus briefly and at length he discerns. Here, through the discernment of impermanence, he removes the idea of permanence. Through the discernment of ill, he removes the idea of bliss. And through the discernment of not self, he removes the idea of self. The signless, the unhankered, and the void. How does he discern fully through impermanence, in discerning the formations as they are? He limits the formations as not existing before their arising, and as not going beyond their fall. And his mind, springing forth into the signless element, attains to peace. Thus he discerns through impermanence fully. How does he discern through ill? In discerning the formations, his mind is agitated with fear as regards hankering, and springs forth into the unhankered. Thus he discerns through ill fully. How does he discern fully through not self? In discerning all states, he regards them as alien, and his mind springs forth to the element of the void, and attains to peace. Thus he discerns not self fully. Thus discerning the 3 states of becoming, the 5 states of existence, the 7 stations of consciousness, the 9 abodes of beings, through extinction, fear, and unreality, he investigates these. The discernment of truth has ended. The knowledge of the rise and fall. That yogin, having discerned the 5 clinging aggregates, applies the 3 characteristics to them, wishing for the happiness of being released from phenomena. And when the internal 5 clinging aggregates are grasped by way of the characteristics, he penetrates rise and fall. Thus, all these states, not having been, arise, and having arisen, pass away. Here in grasping the aggregates, there are 3 kinds: defilement grasps, concentration grasps, insight grasps, defilement grasps. Here the infatuated commoner clings to and grasps willingly the sign of the defilements owing to mental reversal, and regards the world of sights, sounds, tangibles, and ideas as blissful and permanent. It is likened to moths flying into a flame. This is called defilement grasps. Concentration grasps. What is concentration grasps? Here a yogin wishes to gain concentration and grasps the sign in each of the 38 subjects of meditation with the mind, beginning with the knowledge of right mindfulness, and thereby chains the mind as one chains an elephant to make it quiet. This is called concentration grasps. Insight grasps. What is insight grasps? A man, beginning with wisdom of steady viewing, discerns the characteristic of intrinsic nature of form, feeling, perception, the formations, and consciousness. Wishing for and happy in equanimity, he grasps the characteristics. It is like a man who lays hold of a poisonous snake. This is called insight grasps. It is well when a man grasps by way of insight. What is the grasping of the characteristics of feeling, perception, the formations, and consciousness? Characteristics of form. One grasps the form consciousness by way of the earth element, water element, fire element, air element, sense sphere of eye, or sense sphere of body. Characteristic of feeling. One grasps feeling by way of the pleasurable, the painful, or the neither pleasurable nor painful. Characteristics of perception. One grasps perception by way of form perception or perception of states. Characteristics of the formations. One grasps the formations through contact, volition, initial application of thought, sustained application of thought, or deliberation. Characteristics of consciousness. One grasps consciousness through eye consciousness or mind consciousness. One grasps one's particular meditation and produces the signs skillfully. Thus one grasps the characteristics of form, feeling, perception, the formations, and consciousness. Two ways of grasping of thought characteristics. And again, through two ways, one grasps the characteristics of thought, through object and through taking to heart. How does one grasp the characteristics of thought? Through the object. Thought arises owing to object. One should grasp that through this form object, feeling object, perception object, formation object, and consciousness object, thought arises. Thus one grasps. This is the grasping of the characteristics of thought through the object. How does one grasp the characteristics of thought? Through taking to heart. Through taking to heart, thought arises. Thus one should consider. Through taking feeling, perception, and the formations to heart, thought arises. Thus should one introspect. Thus through the taking to heart, one grasps the characteristics of thought. What is the grasping well of the characteristics? Through these activities and these characteristics, one grasps form, feeling, perception, the formations, and consciousness. And again one is able to grasp the characteristics through these activities and these attributes. This is called the grasping well of the characteristics. One penetrates. Rise and fall means one sees clearly. There is a rising, there is passing away. Here the form that has arisen continues. The sign of birth is arising. The characteristic of change is passing away. When these two passages are perceived with the eye of wisdom, there is knowledge of rise and fall. The feeling that has arisen continues. The characteristic of the coming to be of feeling, perception, the formations and consciousness is arising. The characteristic of change in them is passing away. When these two passages are perceived with the eye of wisdom, there is knowledge of rise and fall. Characteristics of rise and fall in three ways. And again one can be well acquainted with the characteristics of rise and fall through three ways. Through cause, condition, and own property. How can one be well acquainted with the characteristics of arising through cause? The aggregates arise owing to craving, ignorance, and karma. When a man perceives this with the eye of wisdom, he becomes familiar with the characteristics of arising through cause. How can one be well acquainted with the characteristics of arising through condition? Conditioned by nutriment, the form aggregate arises. Conditioned by contact, three aggregates arise. Conditioned by name form, the aggregate of consciousness arises. When a man perceives this with the eye of wisdom, he becomes familiar with the characteristics of arising through condition. How can one be well acquainted with the characteristics through own property? The formations arise, renewing themselves. It is like the succession in the flame of a lamp. When a man perceives this with the eye of wisdom, he becomes familiar with the characteristics of arising through own property. One can see the characteristics of the truth of origin through cause and condition. One can see the truth of ill through the arising of thought, through condition, and through own property. One can see by means of characteristics of the being observed. Thus one can be acquainted with the characteristics of arising through three ways. How can one be well acquainted with falling through three ways: through the falling away of cause, the falling away of condition, and the falling away of own property. Here through the falling away of craving, ignorance, and kamma, the falling away of the aggregates is fulfilled. When one perceives this with the eye of wisdom, one becomes familiar with the characteristics of falling away, through the falling away of condition, through the falling away of nutriment, the falling away of the form aggregate is fulfilled. Through the falling away of contact, the falling away of three aggregates is fulfilled. Through the falling away of name and form, the falling away of the aggregate of consciousness is fulfilled. When a man sees this with the eye of wisdom, he becomes familiar with the falling away by way of the falling away of condition. The falling away of the formations is likened to recession in the flame of a lamp. When a man sees this with the eye of wisdom, he becomes familiar with falling away by way of own property. Here through the falling away of the cause, one sees the truth of cessation. Owing to characteristics, the first, seeing, is fulfilled. Through the grasping of the characteristics of the non-become, through the falling away of condition, through own property, through the destruction of views, and through the characteristics of the truth of ill, the first seeing is fulfilled. Acquiring the highest knowledge. How does one acquire the highest knowledge? By seeing the truth of ill through rise and fall, and through the characteristic. How is the destruction of views the cause? One is able to see what he has not yet seen through the sign of the truth of ill. Ill pervades all things. With the destroying of pernicious karma, one sees things as they are. One causes the arising of the thought which is associated with the characteristics of phenomena and rescues the mind from pernicious karma. Having seen the tribulation of karma according to reality, one causes the arising of the thought which is associated with the characteristics of phenomena and rescues the mind from pernicious karma. Here one sees ill everywhere because one goes to the furthest end, investigates fully. Simile of the bird surrounded by fire. It is like a winged bird surrounded by a fire. Before it flies away into the open sky, it is not free of subjection to fear. But when it sees the tribulation of the surrounding fire and is affected by the fearfulness thereof, it flies away. Thus it should be known. Here, through cause, through condition, and through arising, one becomes familiar with the sign of the arising of conditioned arising. This being, this becomes. Owing to the rising of this cause, the rising of this result is fulfilled. Owing to the destruction of the cause and of the destruction of condition, through the seeing of this destruction, one becomes familiar with the characteristics of birth according to condition arising. This not being, this does not arise. Owing to the destruction of this ceases. One can be familiar with the rising. Having seen its ceasing through own property and through rise and fall, one can see the arising of condition arising and the constructed states. One can see the arising and the cessation of this, and also the stability of this. 4 states. One should, through rise and fall, know the 4 states, through oneness, diversity, non-effort, and inherent nature. Seeing the unbroken sequence of the formations, a man holds the flux to be single and does not cling to the idea of multiple fluxes. He does not hold it to be the same throughout, because he sees the destruction of it momentarily and because of the succession of the formations. He does not cling to self, because by nature the formations are uncertain, and because of the succession of the formations. The uninstructed commoner, through wrongly grasping oneness, falls into eternalism or nihilism. Through wrongly grasping diversity, he falls into eternalism. Through wrongly grasping non-effort, he falls into the self-theory. Thus, through wrongly grasping the states, he falls into the theory of non-effort. Here, in the sense of entirety or wholeness, in the sense of distinctiveness of oneness, and in the sense of the inclusion of different characteristics, the characteristics of oneness is fulfilled. In the sense of understanding, it is diversity. In the sense of defilement, it is single. In the sense of means, it is multiple. As a fruit of craving, it is one. As a fruit of karma, it is varied. That yogin, seeing oneness thus, does not cling to the view of discrete series. And seeing diversity, he does not cling to the eternalist theory of oneness. If he sees oneness, he removes annihilism. If he sees diversity, he removes eternalism. That yogin, thus, through rise and fall, knows oneness and diversity. Non-effort in the arising of the formations. How does one see non-effort in the arising of the formations? By what reason are all phenomena characterized by non-effort and immovability, and how does they proceed without being caused to arise by others? Owing to intrinsic nature, cause and effect, union, origin, there is condition arising. Thus, through inherent nature, birth causes one to be born. Here, in the sense of non-life and non-motion, non-effort should be known. In the sense of own nature and condition, inherent nature should be known. Here there is the manifestation of emptiness and non-effort, and also of the karma and the formations. The manifestation of non-effort is called inherent nature. The manifestation of inherent nature is called the formations. Here, through the correct seizure of oneness, one becomes familiar with ill. Through the correct seizure of diversity, one becomes familiar with impermanence. Through the correct seizure of non-effort and inherent nature, one becomes familiar with not-self. Thus the yogin review the rise and fall of all formations without remainder, or only one. Grasping the characteristics in various subjects, he becomes familiar with rise and fall, and causes that knowledge to fill all formations without remainder. It is like a man who, having tasted the water of the sea in one spot, knows all sea water to be salty. Thus should it be known. He feels all formations in two ways, by way of object and by way of non-delusion. Here, grasping the characteristics, one becomes familiar with arising and falling away of all formations. This knowledge of rise and fall is the discernment of all formations. All formations are discerned at the first moment of arising and in the last moment of falling away. They are empty before the first moment of arising and are empty after the last moment of falling away, because there is no other rising before they arose, and there is no other falling away after they fall. Therefore, the knowledge of the rise and fall is the knowledge of the discernment of all formations. The knowledge of rise and fall has ended. Reviewing of breaking up. Thus that yogin enjoys dwelling upon the characteristics of arising and passing away, discerns the formations as subject to breaking up, and develops concentration. Effortlessly, he produces intellection and sees the breaking up of mind states through the form object and through the arising and passing away of the mind. He sees the rise and fall of the mind states associated with that object. In the same way, he sees the rise and fall of the mind states which are associated with these objects through the perception object, the formation object, the consciousness object, and through the rise and fall of mind. Breaking up through three ways. Through assemblage. And again he sees breaking up through three ways. Through assemblage, duality, and through understanding. How through assemblage? Through assemblage, he sees the falling away of the postures in their several spheres and the associated mind and the mental properties with them. And again he grasps form impermanence, feeling impermanence, perception impermanence, formation impermanence, and consciousness impermanence. After that, he sees the breaking up of the mind and the mental properties which are associated with the object of impermanence by way of assemblage, in the same way with the object of ill and the object of non-self. Thus one should discern through assemblage. Through duality. How through duality? Having discerned impermanence of form, he arouses the states of mind that conform to impermanence, and he sees the arising and the passing away of the mind. Thus, having investigated the impermanence of feeling, perception, the formations and consciousness, he arouses the state of mind that conforms to the object of impermanence and sees the arising and the passing away of the mind. In the same way with the object of suffering and the object of not-self, thus he should discern through duality. Through understanding. How through understanding? Having discerned the impermanence of form, he arouses the mind together with the object of impermanence and sees the arising and the passing away of the mind. Thus, through the understanding of insight, he sees the breaking up of many mind states. He discerns the impermanence of feeling, perception, the formations and consciousness, and arouses the state of mind that conforms to the object of impermanence and sees the arising and the falling away of mind states. Thus he sees again and again the breaking up of mind states. Thus through understanding, he sees the breaking up of many states. Likewise, he discerns ill and not self. Thus having understood, he grasps breaking up. That object of ill and breaking up makes for intentness. Intent on the formations always, he attains to well-being every moment. Through this understanding, that yogin, independent of another, knows the whole world by itself, and as unenduring as a poppy seed on the point of an owl, and that in every concentrated thought moment there is a change of arising, stability, and destruction. Simile of drum sound, town of gods, lightning. At this time, the yogin again sees as it is taught in the stanzas thus: depending on each other, do the two called name and form by nature carry on. When one breaks up, the other also breaks. Together do they always start their course. The five states of form, order, and the rest rise not from I, and also not from forms, yet are not different from the set of two. The states condition from a cause arise, like the sound when a drum is struck. The states of form, order, and the rest rise not from the ear, and also not from sounds, yet are not different from the set of two. The five states of form, order, and the rest rise not from nose, and also not from smell, yet are not different from the set of two. The five states of form, order, and the rest rise not from tongue, and also not from taste, yet are not different from the set of two. The five states of form, order, and the rest rise not from body, also not from touch, yet are not different from the set of two. These are not born of form material. These do not arise out of the sphere of thought. They rise depending on conditioned cause, like the sound when a drum is struck. The functions are themselves without strength. Weak is a former cause. What has become is feeble, poor. Infirm is that which is the other's bound. Cold states are also weak. There is no strength at all in union, and what rolls on is always important. For what rolls on has no abiding strength. It has no pith. It cannot cause to rise. This calleth even as a town of gods. None cause this to be. This not produced by self, and does not by its strength remain. On the other states, depending, does it rise, and what it does produce is called corrupt. Does it arise, and what it does produce is called corrupt. Weak is this body. It is not produced by itself and is slow. It is not caused or object by itself. It has no pith and is not free of states condition, but is truly due to many complex states. Short is this life because it is most weak. It goes not anywhere, from nowhere comes, and is not born in some land distant, far. The mind is not a person, soul, or self. At every point of thought, it is bound up with what is pleasing or with what is ill. It passes over mountain, sea, and climb, sees 80,000 aeons in a trice, lives only once and does not come again, does not to 2 thought moments bind itself, and in it is all past and future lost. All that remains is merely aggregate, and this is ever falling without end, and so will also fall the state to be. There is no different science occurring here from the non-born. There is no coming here. In the sense that it is highest, there is none who goes or comes, and in the future will no heaping be, but just a going on. The world does not with Dhamma ever mix. One cannot see the future or the source. All Dhammas are unmade. They are like space, and rising, like the lightning, perish soon. Thus seeing endless destruction, that yogin enters into concentration, just as in rubbing sticks together for fire, sparks flash forth, just so is a class of enlightenment moments, when illumination, joy, calm, bliss, resolve, uplift, presentation, equanimity, and desire rise. If he is not intelligent, the yogin will arouse thoughts of distraction or conceit in this state. How can he remove distraction? That yogin arouses rapture for the doctrine. That rapture pacifies his mind, and sitting again, he calms the mind and makes it conform to the doctrine. If his mind conforms to the doctrine, he rejects the idea of permanence through concentration of the reviewing or breaking up. Being free from the idea of permanence, he becomes familiar with the method and removes distraction of mind. How does that yogin removes conceit? That yogin causes the arising of illumination in a doctrine at first, believes that he has attained to the supramundane state, thinks that he has attained what he has not attained, and does not endeavor further. Thus he arouses conceit. The intelligent yogin knows that defilement disturbs meditation, and knows that worldly states have the formations for object. Thus he knows that the supramundane state has nibbana for object. Having seen thus, he removes distraction and conceit by this knowledge, and seeing only breaking up, practices well and practices repeatedly. The knowledge which is the discernment of falling away has ended.